Hi, I am Allison Fay. I serve as the director of the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, one of the programs of the Zero Abuse Project. And today we're going to be doing a webinar about how to talk with young people about pornography, which is kind of a loaded webinar, and it's a little bit tricky to dive into this topic without a lot of eye contact and chances to stop and process and ask questions. But I figure having the information in this way is better than not having the information at all. But do know that if this is a lot to unpack, that you can reach out to us for additional resources as well. So the impetus for this training was actually, I do a lot of training around internet safety in the schools. So I talk to young people, I talk with young people, I talk with parents, I talk to teachers. We do a lot of different workshops around sexting, around personal safety, around body safety, around internet safety. And I was training pediatricians on how to do well child visits in a way that's positive and empowering and effective. And I mentioned in my presentation that I do a lot of online safety training, and one of the pediatricians raised their hand and they said, what we really need is how do we talk to our patients about pornography when we can't even talk to our kids? And then another doctor chimed in with saying, yeah, I'm afraid to talk to my child about pornography because I don't want him to get interested in it. But it is such an important conversation that we're seeing that our families need us to help them navigate as pediatricians. So I took that challenge and thought, well, if the people who are trying to help parents have healthy, positive conversations with the young people in their life, if they're struggling with this, I can't imagine how everyone is struggling with it. So I tried to put together resources and an overview to help support people who do want to have conversations with young people about pornography, or who don't want to have conversations but should anyway. As we're easing into this topic, just a reminder about self-care. Anytime we talk about anything related to child maltreatment, about crimes against kids, it can cause concerns in our own bodies. Like, we physically respond when we're angry, when we're upset. And just know that pausing the webinar, standing up, going for a walk. I'm not going to be saying anything in this that's worse than what you would see on like Oprah, or I guess I would have to say Dr. Phil now for context. But I'm not going to be using any like crime scene slides or anything worst case scenario. This is a prevention focused webinar, so we're going to be talking about how to prevent, how we get ahead of the problem. But even in doing so, we kind of have to identify the problem in order to talk about prevention. So do take the steps that you need to take, reach out to a supervisor, reach out to colleagues. Maybe if a few of you watch it together and have a chat together, or if you and your partner are trying to get these skills for your family, watch it with your partner, so you have someone to process and talk through. I find that processing loaded information is much easier when you're not doing it by yourself. And so just like we want to make sure that we're breathing before we help the people around us to breathe, do what you need to do to take, to make sure that you're feeling safe and supported as you process this information. So as we begin to talk about what does prevention look like, how can we talk about pornography, what are those pieces, I always want to bring in the work of the Prevention Institute, talking about the spectrum of prevention. When we're trying to prevent any kind of behavior, we don't want to just focus on one aspect of prevention. We want to think holistically. Yes, we want to promote those individual knowledge and skills for parents to have these conversations with their kids, but how do we foster coalitions and networks? So if a child isn't getting this information from their caregivers for a variety of reasons, where else can they get good information? How can we change policies and organizational practices to make child abuse images harder for folks to access? How can we influence policy and legislation in ways that help protect children from the online culture that the adults are creating? How can we protect kids from the adults who are causing the harm? So thinking about prevention holistically, and today we're going to be really focusing on the individual knowledge and skills when it comes to how do we individually have this conversation, but just challenge you to think about it. What are other ways that we could tackle this as we think about what prevention might look like? So Cordelia Anderson is one of the experts in the field who I have been lucky enough to learn from by being able to watch her present on multiple occasions and read her work. And she has the book, The Impact of Pornography on Children, Youth, and Culture. And I think when we learn from the people who've been doing the work and are trying to pass on in a way that makes sense, I like how Cordelia puts it here, in the sense that parents do make a huge difference in this issue. So if you're thinking, well, I don't know if the culture that we live in and what kids have access to, if I'll be able to be helpful at all, just knowing that what parents say and do does matter. And so when the kids are being inundated with all these conflicting sexual messages, having someone with whom to process that, having someone to go through some what if scenarios and do some safety planning, some problem solving, these are skills and tools that are very effective as kids try to figure out that old analogy, we spend so much time trying to teach kids how to swim when the water is dangerous, and sometimes we have to go upstream and figure out what we can do to clean up the water. And parents can be involved in both of those activities when it comes to having these conversations. So most parents are talking to their kids about what is appropriate for them to look at online. Most have talked to their kids about media to consume, with less so doing it frequently. But these conversations, these check-ins are happening. Parents are having conversations. The question is, do they feel equipped to have the conversations, and are those conversations effective? And so that is part of what we're going to be talking about today. But we're on the right track. And we know that our young people are navigating a digital world in a way that we never did. I always date myself when I'm in the junior highs, and I let them know that I got my first email account my senior year of high school. They're like, "Oh, Allison, we're so sorry. It was kept from me for so long." It's like, no, it wasn't kept from me. That's when it was invented. That's, just in my life, going from middle school of Oregon Trail to high school having email, and then just seeing everything as it continues to ebb and flow, and technology sometimes getting ahead of our humanity. And so some of the same things that parents have told us have been helpful in parenting without having the concerns of the internet are also helpful with the concerns. Knowing who your child likes to spend time with and why, knowing where your child likes to go, where in your neighborhood they like to go, and where do they like to go online. Thinking about consequences. What might consequences look like in a way that's a learning experience as kids are navigating the world around them online? Because we know that these conversations need to happen, yes, when kids are young, about safety. And parents sometimes say, well, my kid's in 6th grade, so we've covered it all, and we're, they're at the age now where I don't have to worry so much. And worry is kind of a wasted emotion. It's more of, how do we plan? How do we think? How do we process? How do we know? How can we help our kids to know that they can come to us if there's a problem? Because as kids get older, it can be trickier for them to reach out to parents for so many reasons. We could spend an hour on that, and if this was an interactive webinar, this would be a part where we'd really stop and chat for a while about why is it that our 12 to 17-year-olds are the high-risk group, and why is it that we need to increase the conversations as kids get older instead of decrease. I'm sure those of you with children of that age and with teens and those who work with teens have a lot of different thoughts about why 12 to 17 can be such a tricky age, and why those connections need to be increased instead of decreased. And one of the things we promote here quite a bit is that every kid should have a safety net of 5 different people that they can talk to, who, if they have a problem, 5 different adults. And we say adults because we'll talk a little bit about brain development here, but someone whose brain is done so that their brain isn't arguing with their gut, that can be helpful. We say 5 because sometimes it's the person on the net who is the problem, who has worked their way into that position of authority and are using it to cause harm. And so we say 5 because sometimes the first person we tell doesn't know how to help us, or we try to tell, or we're scared to tell one of our 5, and so we need 4 more. So thinking about how can we build these safety nets around young people, so when they're in these challenging years, if they have a problem that's making them feel unsafe or putting them at risk, and they're scared to tell a parent, who is someone else in that net of 5 that they could go to. And so thinking about that during these years, because the brain is not done yet. The last part of the brain that gets done is the part of the brain that's, and we're always still learning, obviously, but the part of the brain with major chunks of brain development that finishes in your early 20s is the part of the brain that says, is this a good idea? If I click this link now, how might this impact me? That's the last part to be done. And yet we hand kids tools that are so immediate. And so, that immediate curiosity that young people have, the immediate want to defy authority, the exploration, all these different traits that's a part of them living out their job description, which is learning how to live on their own, and the parent living out their job description, which is keeping their young person safe, and that being a very tricky thing to navigate when the teenage brain is not done yet. And interestingly enough, the part of the teenage brain that does the most work, if you read the Dr. David Walsh books about why do they act that way, all about the teenage brain, just talking about the part of the brain learning how to argue is doing a lot of work. And so we find that it argues against, when we look at public personal safety, it argues against the part of the body that works to keep us safe. And so we kind of have the gut and the brain fighting back and forth. So when you're watching a horror movie and the teenager hears that noise outside and says, oh, I'm going to go see what it is, that's kind of that back and forth of their gut telling them not to, but their brain wanting to take those risks. And so being aware that adults are thinking with the rational part of their brain, and the teens are processing information with the emotional part of their brain. And so that's their decision-making center, is the emotional part. So if you are trying to figure out why a young person isn't being rational, it's because the part of their brain that they are using isn't the rational part. They're responding from an emotional place. So we look at the different elements of brain development. We look at the different elements of just the challenges of those years. And then we look at the new challenges that technology is bringing to add on to that. The idea of being pressured by the person that you are dating, or the person that you like, or the person that you want to be partnered with, to send sexual photos, and threatening if they're not doing that. And this is not the sexting prevention presentation, but I would be remiss in not bringing up the fact that we spend so much time when we're talking about sexting of trying to encourage people how to say no. We don't often get to the root causes of why are people asking for these pictures, and how can we increase the respect in these relationships so they're not putting the person that they are in a relationship with in that position of having to make that choice of, we won't be together anymore if you don't send me these pictures. And we need to get more to those questions as we do prevention work, talking about the fact that this is now becoming normative. Most boys and most girls, I don't have data around non-binary kiddos in this particular study, but if we look at the fact that boys and girls are exposed to online porn during their adolescence, we have to look at, all genders are seeing this pressure. Boys are more likely to see images at an earlier age and see more extreme images and view it more often. And so the idea that exposure to pornography is now considered to be normal, if as you go through adolescence, that having that experience. And this is not a paper magazine behind a bed, or those, these are actual living, breathing people, video in front, and you have to think about how that changes the dynamic of what you're seeing when it is that actual video versus the still images, and what that looks like. And this goes back to the doctor piece. The American College of Pediatricians are urging healthcare professionals to communicate the risks of porn use to families and offer resources both to protect kids from viewing pornography and to help treat individuals suffering from its negative effects. I was on a work group doing a prevention project with some folks at a hospital in our state, and having conversations with pediatricians who have kids that they're seeing their clinic who are addicted and are seeking out, even if parents are locking things up in cabinets and locking up consoles and unplugging Wi-Fi, that they're so wanting more of these images that it's almost as they're treating an addiction. And I don't want to use words that I don't. Addiction is not my area of expertise by any means. So I don't want to use those words flippantly and be wrong. But just that idea of seeking that out of the brain, wanting more when its appetite has begun. And we look at the American College of Pediatricians just talking about the fact that of the negative effects, mental disturbance, unrest for young school-age kids can include acting out in violent behavior. If we're seeing this and it's confusing and it's confusing to our hearts and to our brains, and where does that go in our bodies when we're trying to process and there's no place to process what we're seeing? Pornography should never be used as a tool to teach children human sexuality. For older adolescents, it gives a false narrative. How do people form sexual healthy relationships? I was volunteering with high school students in a volunteer program, and we were having a conversation around pornography. And one of the young men in the program said, well, I think he was 16. I'm 16 years old. I've never been on a date. I've never even held hands with somebody. So I'm watching a lot of porn. So when I find someone who does like me back, I'll know what to do. And that broke my heart, because it's like, okay, this is someone who's trying to do the right thing, trying to, when they have the opportunity to be in a relationship, trying to be ready for that experience. And pornography has a lot of things, but I'm assuming a few of you would argue with me that healthy and realistic are not two of the things that tend to fall on the spectrum of pornography, especially the realistic piece. So if someone's trying to look at that as saying, well, that's how to do it, so I'm going to try, that realism, when it's usually degrading to the performer, what does that do to the brain of a kid who hasn't even held hands with somebody yet? And at what age? It depends on the study. I find it so interesting when I do the sexting prevention work with the studies, when they ask kids who are currently in high school if they've engaged in sexting behavior, the numbers are low. But if they ask kids who are in college, young adults who are in college, if they engaged in this behavior when they were high school students, the numbers start to dramatically increase, it seems. So I always find it interesting that kind of when you ask and how you ask seems to give us different data. But this particular study had the average age of the first exposure, when we looked at all genders, being about 13, the youngest being 5, and the latest older than 26. So thinking about, how, with the first exposure being accidental in almost half of the cases, and then a third of the cases being intentional, and then being forced to watch by often peers, someone saying, oh, look at this video that I found on my phone, those kinds of things. And so thinking about if the first exposure is accidental, have we had conversations with kids saying, there is some stuff on the internet that I don't want you to see, because I'm worried of what it does to hearts and to brains. And so if you come across videos that have people who aren't wearing clothes, if you come across videos where it looks like that someone's being hurt, if you come across videos that just make you confused, you're not in trouble. If you can please, you're not in trouble. Stop the video and come and get me so I can see what it is. Because sometimes we stumble on things. One of the most famous examples is like whitehouse.com being a porn site and whitehouse.gov being the actual White House site. Porn companies buy up domains that they think will get traffic. And so sometimes folks clicking on a link think they're going one place and then they're not. And in that moment, if the child is realizing they've stumbled on something, do they know that they can come and talk to you right away, and that you're not in trouble, but that you want to know what happens, that you can help them figure it out? Even just some of those very basic conversations at a young age, to let them know that if this happens, that this is a time that we pause and come and get a moment. And then the additional research, that the average age is 11. So if we're thinking about when do we start having the conversations, it should probably be before 11, if that's when they're starting to see it on average. This was a particular study where they were looking for young men in their 20s who had never looked at pornography to see how sexual attitudes are different between those who had and who hadn't, but they couldn't find any young men who hadn't. So thinking about that huge spectrum, it's like saying, when I say pornography, it's like there's a huge spectrum of books, there's a huge spectrum of magazines, there's a huge spectrum of videos. So there isn't one kind that sums it all up. And so being aware that how it's used and what is used, and these are all things that need to be a part of coming across your own family safety plan, is thinking about what might our conversation look like based on what our concerns may be. A Childline survey, 1 in 5 youngsters surveyed said, yep, I saw something pornographic that had shocked or upset them. And 1/10 of 12 to 13-year-olds fear that they're addicted to looking at pornography. So thinking about, okay, how can we have these conversations before the age of 10 or 11 about bodies, about what they might see, about what this, about the fact that once we see something, we can't unsee it. And I use the example when I'm talking to junior high students just about the fact if they remember that scary movie that they watched before they were old enough to watch it, how that sometimes is the movie that always is in their nightmares and is in their dreams. You know, a lot of adults talk about that one movie that they shouldn't have watched because it got stuck. And that one of the dangers with seeking out pornography when, you know, especially with developing brains and developing hearts, is that our brains can get stuck on some of those images and replay them over and over and over and want to seek out more of those images. So thinking about how we can be protective of our brains and what healthy things about relationships we can put in its place. And we look at the fact that when kids are looking at violent X-rated material over time, they're 6 times, in this particular study, 6 times more likely to be sexually aggressive. And so, you know, let's have conversations with young people about respecting no, not just about saying no, but respecting no. And what does a body look like when a body doesn't want to be touched? You know, sometimes we don't use words, but we might notice if someone doesn't want to be touched that they take a couple steps away, or we see them start to stiffen, or we can, what are body signs we can look at when we have to stop and think about our own bodies, and if we're making people feel comfortable or uncomfortable. And that's before we get to this point, but just sort of, we spend a lot of our time teaching kids, you know, we try to harden the target, you know, teach kids about their private parts, teach kids the right names for body parts, talk to kids about touches. These are all important things. We also have to flip it to the other side and talking to kids about, you know, not to be the one causing the harm, and why is it so important that people do get to own their own bodies, and why is it important that we respect private parts and respect bodies of other people. I just have to say, on a side note, it's really tricky to find clip art for this presentation because I don't know these actors at all, and I don't want to, you know, make them feel, anyway, it was, a lot of these slides don't have clip art, and I'm usually all about putting in pictures and images, but it was just tricky to figure out how that looked. So my apologies if you're seeing a lot of words and not a lot of people. We look at, you know, the average age. Again, this is X-rated sexual attitudes. In the average survey of 1,000 adolescents, 2/3 of males and 1/3 of the females had seen at least one form of sexually explicit media in the past year. And so we think about how all kiddos in that age are accessing, are having these opportunities for conversation. And then we look at, you know, the young people engaging in these behaviors earlier when they're watching these behaviors. You know, it's that piece of when we aren't able to dissect what's being sold to us, when we're not being able to dissect what is real and what is true, it becomes confusing to try to navigate in our own lives what we are trying to sell and what is real and what is true. So one of the examples, and I'm not trying to minimize a serious topic, but when I was a kid, the Archie comics would sell the sea monkeys in the back of the Archie comic. You'd save a certain amount of, I'm really dating myself here, but you'd send in a certain amount of, you know, like proofs of purchase with some money, and then you'd get what you thought was this like family of sea monkeys with the crowns on floating around, and this family that would live in, you know, and I remember doing that and sending it in and getting back this thing of water in this aquarium with just like gunk floating around. I was like, are the gunk the sea monkeys? Is the gunk a thing? Is it not a thing? And realizing for the first time in that moment of the amount that I'd saved up and the amount that I worked to get this, that what was being advertised to me wasn't real. You know, they were trying to sell me something, and then when I got it, it didn't live up to the advertisement. And I think part of that is just the media the opportunities that parents have with young people to dissect the media. What is this commercial trying to sell to us right now? What is this commercial about weight loss saying about bodies? You know, what is this commercial about makeup saying about self-esteem? Let's talk about that you're enough as you are, and how is it that folks try to use commercials and advertisements to make you feel less than to buy stuff? And how might pornography be like that? How might it make you feel less than? How might it increase your interest in buying things that you maybe shouldn't buy? How might it increase how you relate to other people? Let's talk about how, you know, commercials, we're going to talk about how commercials shape what we believe, and being critical of that, and learning that those media skills, that also becomes a part of learning what is being sold to us in pornography. In the work that I do, I predominantly come from the field of missing children, and it's beyond disheartening and heartbreaking that in our very rare cases when children are abducted to be killed, which again, we have about 105 to 115 of those a year, so it's 115 too many, but very rare scenarios. When they looked at, the state of Washington Office of Attorney General looked at these offenders over years and years who had engaged in these rare child abduction murders, and they're finding that the use of pornography as a trigger of these acts is increasing among these offenders. So they're watching these videos, these sexual abuse images of kids, and then they are going out and acting what they have just watched. So thinking about what that looks like when we think about prevention. And adult use, I mean, it's one of those things where we tell young people, don't do this because, and I think we also have to acknowledge the fact that we live in a society where adults do engage with pornography, and so that's a challenge to think about how does that impact hearts and minds of the adults in our country, and how we advocate or don't advocate for kids. You know, I mean, that's one of many questions this could bring up, but talking to young people, especially just about the fact as relationships are developing, as bodies are developing, as our lives are unfolding, that we don't want to engage with something that's selling us a lie about what relationships and intimacy and what healthy can look like. Also devastating to me is the most popular search terms. We ask kids, I don't want to say ask kids, I feel like in our culture we vilify young people for responding to sexual attention that they receive. Young people do need attention and affection to thrive and to be healthy, and so I'm always excited and a challenge working with youth serving organizations that are trying to figure out ways to positively use attention and affection in a way to help kids grow and gain their independence, become leaders. And then on the flip side of that, we look at the fact that teens are sexualized younger and younger and younger. It's the second most popular search term on one of the largest porn, websites. So when young people are being sexualized by the adults younger and younger, it's up to us as adults to start pushing back on that culture and letting kids be kids. We know that young people can access these sites. Over half of teens who visit an adult website just lie about their age to get in, picking a year that they were born. And so thinking about, I'll have parents sometimes say, well, I haven't had any conversations about porn with my child because I have parental locks on our computer, so I don't have to worry about it. We have to remember that even if your computer happens to be, locked down in a variety of ways, there are lots of different ways that young people can go around and through blocks. It's one tool out of many. It shouldn't stand alone, but that it's far more, they could be at a friend's house, they could be, and so when they could be at, a public, let's say it's a coffee shop using their Wi-Fi or whatever it might be. So having conversations about what ifs in different scenarios. What if you are at a friend's house and your friend says they want to show you a really, really weird video that they saw on the internet, and you think that let me start over with that that analogy. So you're at a friend's house and your friend says, okay, I have a video that I want us all to watch that you're going to be all grossed out by. You know, in that moment, what are things that you could do if you think that it might be porn? You know, if you're 13, let's think of 6 different ways you can handle that. You know, maybe you and another kid say, oh, I don't want to watch that. That's gross. We're going to go outside and play basketball. You know, maybe it's having a text password that you text me and it means come pick me up. I'm in over my head. Maybe it is just pushing back and saying, oh, I don't want to see this because then I can't unsee it. So I'm going to go and do this other thing. You know, depending on the social group, depending who they are, think about what different strategies might be, and who might be the people who can be your allies if you make a different choice. You're not having to stand alone. The United States is watching the most porn, and so we do have a problem. And the porn revenue is larger than all combined revenues for professional football, baseball, and basketball. So when we think about this is a money-making proposition for the folks who build their living this way. And so how can they hook kids younger and younger so that they're going into the pay sites as soon as they turn 18? You know, if we see this as a rite of passage in our culture, how is that impacting, how is that money that's invested impacting the choices and the resources for parents? And then we just, again, looking at, as the last slide sort of the problem, I feel like now that we've really talked about what the problem is, we need to start moving into some positive solutions before we all start rocking back and forth in the fetal position. Because it is a problem, and it is pretty disheartening and frustrating to unpack. So let's talk about what we can do about it. One of which is the talks. There's not one talk about sex or sex education or healthy relationships. It should be ongoing. We should have resources to make it easier for our kids to have conversations with us about bodies. You know, one of my friends who's a single parent said to his daughter, I don't want you Googling breasts and butts when you hit pre-puberty, when you have questions about things. You know, here's a written journal. If you have questions about your body, write it in the journal, put it on my pillow, I'll write back, I'll put it back on your pillow. So we never have to talk about it if you're embarrassed, but I always want to make sure you have good information. So if you hear like, oh, French kissing makes a person pregnant, you're not sure if it does or doesn't, put that in the journal, put it on my pillow, and I can write back, no, it absolutely does not. And give you good information about your body. And maybe I'll have to call the pediatrician, maybe I'll have to reach out to your aunt, but maybe I'll do a Google search, but I'll always try to get you good information about your body so that you're not seeking it out online. Because good news is that most people don't use the internet to harm kids. The bad news is the people who do tend to hurt a lot of kids. And we think about, you know, it's not do we know them or not, it's what are they asking you to do. Someone wants to talk to you about sex on the internet is a problem. You know, a healthy grown-up is not going to ask to talk to you about your sex life or ask if you have questions about sex at 3:30 p.m. on a chat app. So just thinking about, you know, where are young people going to get information about sex and love and respect and consent, so that they can be grounded in reality and grounded and healthy. And parents can be our best primary sex educators as they work to help build healthy kids. You don't have to do it alone. And so think about having conversations about sex, having books around. You know, I grew up with the 1970s classic, Where Do I Come From? Which was just one more book on the bookshelf, one more way to learn about bodies. It wasn't like a shameful part of the bookshelf. It wasn't anything that had shame or embarrassment to it. It was just, yep, here's more learning. And when we have those conversations, it allows parents to share their values. And it instills a filter, so if they do see pornographic images, they know that that's not the healthy stuff. Okay, this stuff about bodies and this information, this book, this stuff that our parents have explains what is healthy, what is positive, what is, and that this particular video and someone's using it to hurt someone else and demean someone else, this is not healthy, this is not respectful. We don't want pornography to be the primary sex educator of our kids. So thinking about low-key discussions, it's really helpful when you see something in the news, or something across your news feed of saying, "Oh, have you ever thought about this? Have you heard about this particular app and what it does?" And I was thinking about all the ways it could be dangerous. Why would it be helpful? You know, and to have some of those conversations, and then even just scenarios about life, you know, in the sense of, oh, I was working with someone in 5th or 6th grade. So what's the biggest problem kids have in your grades at your school? And it was, oh, it's figuring out who likes who, and who is, you know, and just unpacking that. And even when they're young, and, you know, if we treat young people's concerns with respect and not embarrassment, and we're not calling on the phone and laughing about what they asked or putting it up on our own social media pages, we got to be respectful of where kids are at with their questions. If we are that way when it comes to bodies when they're little, that respect continues as kids get older, and knows that you are a person who wants to be to have these resources for kids. So choosing the setting. A lot of young people say that they don't like when parents make direct eye contact. It's hard to think, and they feel like they're on the spot. So maybe when you're walking the dog, maybe when you're in the car driving somewhere, thinking about a place where everyone feels comfortable and everyone feels safe, and it's not lording over somebody, and it's not feeling like somebody is being cornered. But I want to, you know, it's really important to me. We talk so much about health in our family, about how to make healthy choices, and I want to make sure that we also are talking about sexual health and about bodies, and about answering questions that I can for you about how we can be healthy. And let's talk about pornography in that lens, using a lot of what if scenarios and open-ended questions. It's interesting, you know, a question like, oh, you know, people say, I'm so worried to say the word pornography because what if my kid doesn't know the word? And I look at my own social media where people are using porn to describe food, you know, food porn, and this, it's just become such a part of culture, and we don't necessarily always know what that might mean. So open-ended questions, you know, have you ever heard the word pornography before? Do you know what that means? Have any of your friends ever talked about that before? Do you know what it means? You know, to see where they're at, what they do know. And if they don't, say, okay, well, just so you know, I want to make sure that you get information from me and not from the kids on the bus. So pornography is when people video sexual activities as a way of making money. And it's similar to movies and books in the sense that it's usually not realistic, but it's different from other movies and books because some of what we see and hear can really impact how we believe about our bodies. You know, think about your wanted outcome. In this conversation, what do I hope is the one sentence they get out of it? I'm not going to try to pour all my thoughts about pornography into a half an hour, but what's the one thing I want them to know? I want them to know that in our family, it's my hope and my expectation that if you're presented with pornography, that you opt out. Let's talk about why that's my hope for you, and let's talk about what that might look like. Modeling the behavior you want your children to copy, and that goes back to, you know, if we're asking our kids and challenging them not to use pornography as a way of shaping how they believe, you know, what videos, what images are we viewing? Are they positive? Are they healthy? Are they empowering? And being critical with our own media that we consume. Working together to find healthy, creating an outlet for questions, whether it's a book on the pillow, whether it's you can text me anytime if you're scared to ask me, thinking about what those questions might look like. Don't wait until there's been a problem. We always want to try to get on the front end of these. Sometimes we don't know there's a problem until after it's happened, but it's much easier, for example, for me to go to a school, as I do almost all the time, and talk about internet safety when there hasn't been a specific problem, but the schools are just trying to be proactive, versus there's been a big issue with this kid asking these kids for pictures, and now we need someone to come in. That makes a very different dynamic. So kids are much less defensive and are much more interested when it isn't something they're worried that they're in trouble. Putting the heart back in the objectification. When we turn someone into an object, we take their heart and their soul out, and they become their body parts. And why is it important in our family that we see people as whole people? That might be based on your faith, that might be based on your spirituality, that might be based on your respect for others, but putting back the heart in other people. We don't want to watch people being harmed online because it might make us think that we might forget that they're people. It might make it easier for us to cause harm to other people. You know, and just having some of those conversations. And then using other media to talk about violence and respect. If kids are going to engage in the media, they're wonderful examples of opportunities to look at what is working, what is right. Let's watch this movie. why do you think this kid was able to talk to their parent about this really big problem? How do you think the parent made it possible for them to do that? Is there anything I could be doing to make it easier for you to talk to me when you have a problem? Because when that kid did reach out to their parent, I was so relieved because I knew that that parent wanted to be helpful and in that, you know, and using the media to have some of those harder conversations. So it's not about them and their friends, it's about this character, and let's use that. You know, personally, I'm a big fan of the Harry Potter series just because it's phenomenal. And using that to unpack, what does real friendship look like? Why did Hermione reach out in this scene and do what Ron and Harry didn't want her to do, even though she knew it was the right thing? How is it to stand against friends when you think, you know, some of those important conversations can be used when it's fictional characters. Oh, I'm going to say one more thing about that. I train on empathy building, which is a different training. And I talk to kids in elementary schools about, you know, the more fiction we read, the science tells us the more empathetic we can be. Why do you think that is? I was in a school last year, and a kid raised his hand and said, I just don't want to be the bad guy in someone else's story. And that is my favorite just way of looking at that. You know, when we put ourselves into books and into media and into these conversations, we can think about what is it like to be the hero in someone else's story? What is it like to be a helper? Why is that important in our family? So just some what if scenarios. You know, what if you click on a pop-up ad and it leads you to a site that makes you feel anxious, upset, or confused? I was speaking at one school about online safety, and a fifth grader approached me afterwards and he said, oh, I had a pop-up ad with a girl who didn't have a shirt on trying to sell me something. Am I going to go to jail now? It's like, no, that's not what's happening. And he'd been carrying this fear for a while because he didn't quite know what had happened and what he'd seen and what part of it. And so we want to make sure that they don't have to wait for a speaker to come to their school, but that we can have conversations. You know, you might see stuff online because there are people who try to use the internet to sell things when you're not suspecting it that you're not ready for, and that was an accident. If that happens, you're not in trouble, but I always want to know about it because I want to see what you're seeing so we can make a plan so it doesn't happen again. And then we really have to live that out. If kids come to us and say, hey, I was clicking this and this happened, to try to be very calm, non-shaming, non-embarrassing, not making a big thing of it, but thanking them for telling you and making a plan around it. The Australian government has a great website talking about how to talk to your 8 to 12-year-old about pornography, and they have open-ended prompts, so the link is there on the bottom. But just, you know, open-ended question: what do you know about pornography? Do kids ever talk about it? What do they say? You know, even though it's uncomfortable, can you tell me what you have seen? And then we can talk about content, we can talk about why it can be dangerous, why there's not the respect, and to have them understand the why. I don't know if you've seen the movie Screenagers, the documentary about young people and technology. But in Screenagers, one of the young men says, my parents tell me the why about why they don't want me to do something on my phone. I'm more likely to not do it than if they just say not to. It's a process of why being really important for young people. Consent. I can't say enough. I mean, as someone who works in sexual violence prevention, the importance of learning consent, you know, even from the non-sexual health lens, but just the sense of, oh, I don't know if Jody wants to be touched today. Can you see in her body that she seems like she kind of wants space? So let's wait and hug her when she says that she wants a hug. You know, and just sort of starting to help kids understand, to read signals, to ask questions. Can I hug you? You know, those kinds of messages when they're very young lays that foundation for more consent talk as kids are getting older. My colleague Jane Straub has a webinar separately on how to talk to kids about consent, so I don't want to go too much into her information here, but just knowing that, like, the resistance that I sometimes get from parents is, I don't want to talk to my kids about consent because they're not sexually active and I don't want them to think that they should be. And I don't see those two things as being linked, consent and being sexually active. Consent is about body ownership, and it's about listening to signals and asking questions about body ownership and knowing that you have ownership of your own body. If someone's trying to make you do something that you don't want to do, you know, if someone thinks that holding your hand is romantic and you're not in the mood for having someone hold your hand, knowing that you have the right to set those boundaries, that doesn't make you a bad person. And those conversations Letting young people know that body ownership is so important, both so that they can be respectful of their peers and they can set their own boundaries and have those boundaries be respected. We look at our sexting cases and just the fact that the most important motivation why people are sending those images is because of pressure and coercion. And so I think about that idea about consent. You know, if the number one reason that people are sending sexual images is because they think that if they can't, then they're not going to be accepted, they're not going to have that person who likes them. That's the conversation there, is what does consent look like? What does coercion look like? Why would someone want to coerce you into doing something, doing something with your body that you don't want to do or you're not sure? And who are the friends that you have who have similar feelings about this, so that if you're feeling painted into a corner, you have someone to support you as you set those boundaries? What does it mean to have those boundaries and to talk about coercion and consent? And again, that's not jumping right away into being worried that your child is suddenly having sex. It's giving your young person information about if they're being pressured and they're being isolated. What does isolating behavior look like? You know, we talk about that net of 5, that safety net of 5. Anyone who's trying to separate us from our net can be a problem. You know, you can't have those friends if you're dating me. That's isolating behavior. That's not how a net works. Healthy people want to be one of many people who love you and who support you, and unhealthy people want to separate you. What does that separation look like in relationships? When does that start to get dangerous? When does caring go into controlling? And so these are conversations about consent that we can have with people starting at very young ages, about listening to your body. When you don't want someone to touch you, how does your body feel? What words can we use? What if that person doesn't respect that? Who can you tell? What if your body freezes up and you don't say no because you're scared? Just so you know, it's still not your fault. You can still tell me. Our bodies just do that sometimes. Australia also came out with a resource for parents called It's Time We Talked. They were looking at this issue of pornography as a public health crisis. They wanted to give parents information about statistics. They have a tab for teachers, for parents, for kids, and gives you some good discussion starters and some good resources there. And we look at, you know, a young person who has not yet experienced any type of romantic intimacy, seeing all these aggressive acts directed to females and seeing aggression being met with neutral or pleased response. What does that do as they're trying to decide what does it mean to be a sexual being in our world? Does it mean to be aggressive? Does it mean to cause harm? These are things we want to help young people unpack so that they're not confused about what does consent look like, what is healthy. Let's have these conversations. We talked about pornography literacy. You know, I talked about that earlier on, just media literacy in general. But the idea that these are created, that they are productions. And that's a part of growing in intelligence as we learn about what is the commercial trying to sell us that might not be true. What is this culture of pornography trying to sell us that might not be true? A phenomenal resource, and if you take no other slide but this one today, we'll have had a successful hour together. The Culture Reframed is Gail Dine's research and her group coming up with a new resource for parents. It's aimed for parents of kids aged 9 to 12, and it's divided up. It's a free program online, learn at your own pace, 5 sections, 13 modules with stats, with questions, with open-ended tools. Just, it's a wealth of resources that you can experience as a parent, and then feel very equipped to, with your discussion starters and with your why. You know, if we talk about, well, why is this a problem? Why don't you want me to see it? So you can really process these things for yourself before sitting down, and so you can start as soon as possible, because we want to, again, have conversation about bodies early and often for prevention. Just some of the modules to give you a sense of Culture Reframed. You know, they go into the compose yourself, where you're talking to young people, you know, about pornography, making sure that you're calm, helping the child take ownership in what they might have seen, in the sense of, this is sort of after there's been a problem. Talk through mood, validate emotions. You use the opportunity to parent. Override the message that porn is selling to your kid. Decide how you want to be a part of the solution. The video that you watched, what it was saying was, these are the only kind of bodies that are attractive. Why might that be not a good message for us to think about? Why are different bodies, and to override some of those messages, to create a strategy together and to evaluate, to continue to check in. So, gives a lot of specific tools, and it gives a lot of good scripts. I love, sometimes I'll be training on body safety and parents say, just give me a script. You print out a script, and Culture Reframed has really solid scripts that talks about, in this case, curiosity. Yeah, curiosity is normal, and people do have questions, but if you're searching online, these probably won't be the right answers for the question. So let's talk about what is accurate and what isn't. Common Sense Media is another good website to know about. And when parents say, what book is the best book? I always say to go to a bookstore and find a book that you would feel comfortable reading. Because if you don't ever feel comfortable reading it, if you feel it's too advanced from where your kid is now, and they're not, you wouldn't be comfortable pulling off the shelf and just adding it into the rotation, then it's not going to get used. So find one that is your comfort level as you're starting to have these conversations. And on our website, jwrc.org, we have a whole list of ones that parents have recommended to us over the years. But finding one that you feel comfortable and taking it from there. I talked about this before, just in the sense of why it's so important that we become the primary sex educators of our kids. Most people on the internet are healthy, but the ones who are not cause a lot of damage. And the number one thing that our predatory online offenders are looking for is kids who want to talk about sex, who mention sex, who ask about sex, who have sex in their screen name, who post about sex. And so why do we want to save our body questions for our 5 adults in person? Who are those 5 adults? What if one adult in person is the one who doesn't know the rules about bodies and is doing things that's a problem? Who are other adults that want to help keep you safe, and having some of these conversations? And the second being emotional neediness. And so we think about how those two things can go together. The person who's emotionally needy can be seeking out negative attention, affection. So how can we build those safety nets around our kids and build it with healthy, what are your kids' passions? What are things that they love to do? How can we move towards those passions? Parents will ask what parental control software is the best one. Every year PC Magazine sort of puts out a chart online with the pros and cons, the different pieces of software. What I would say is to not rely on software as your only tool, not say, well, we have it, so we don't have to have that conversation. It could be one piece of the puzzle, but if you have it, have conversations with them about the why. And then if you are doing regular check-ins on what's happening on phones and on computers, which is a great thing to do, respecting privacy. If someone's texting about, well, I really like this person, I think they're, whatever, but that is private information, so you're not going to bring that up to another relative or tease your young person about that. You're just looking to see if people are using it safely, but you're still respecting where they're at with what they're, David Finkelhor, who is sort of the research guru in the world of crimes against children, wrote a really powerful op-ed about saying it's not the apps that are banning certain apps and telling kids not to talk to strangers. It doesn't bring into what works best. And so teaching them early on about what healthy looks like in relationships, helping them practice refusal skills. How do we say no more than 3 times? If someone's asking us to send a picture we know we shouldn't send, and they've asked us more than once, who do we reach out to help us at that point? What would that look like? Emotion control, bystander mobilization. If you see someone being mistreated, what does that look like to you and a group of friends? How do you support the person being harmed without going after the person causing the harm? It usually escalates it. These skills usually come from parents, but schools and other youth serving organizations should get into the act, because we're seeing kids who really need these lessons. And thinking about just in the lens of the trainings that we do around faith communities, I was a youth minister for I think 7 or 8 years, and every January we'd do sex ed as the sort of the curriculum with the high schoolers. And with junior high we do healthy relationships, and with elementary school kids we do body ownership. And I'd put it in the bulletin for our faith community. I'd put it on the posters so that everyone was opting in, knowing what they were opting into, and no one felt like they were having something, happen without their consent or knowing what was happening. And I was worried I would have really small groups in January, but I would see kids I hadn't seen the whole rest of the year. We get the newsletter and be like, oh, okay, this is happening. I want you to have this information. So sometimes we think about what that safety net can look like. Who are other people who can help with, in answering some of these questions in a way that is healthy and that is positive. Because we don't want to be ashamed of bodies. We don't want to be ashamed of sex. We want to help see sexual activities, see bodies as positive things. And then how do we use the positive parts of who we are in ways that help other people, in ways that are positive and not negative. And so we go back to who are the 5 people that form your net. As I wrap up just with a few resource slides, I want to thank you for making it through the hour. It's trying to get a lot of information in a short period of time, and sometimes spending so much time on the problem makes me sad, because it is so hard to know that this is the world that our young people are trying to navigate in and around. But knowing that caring adults are our biggest prevention piece, and knowing that you really do have a voice in this, and that you can help shape how your kids see themselves and how they see the world and how they see the media, and media is such a broad term, but how they, are they critical of what's being sold to them? Are they critical of the messages in pornography? Do they know what healthy can look like? And so just knowing that many voices in this work is so important. So in Minnesota, the Annex Teen Clinic provides workshops for caregivers on how to talk to your kids about sexuality topics. That's a nonprofit to know about, and they suggest those conversations happening early and often. So getting connected to Annex Teen Clinic and see if you can attend one of their classes. Our agency doesn't specifically train parents on how to talk about sex. We do more how to talk to kids about online, how to talk to kids about personal body safety, but they're all tied in the world of, we want kids walking around smart and not scared. We want to empower and equip kids to own their bodies as a positive gift. Ask the Mediatrician. Dr. Michael Rich is a pediatrician who coordinates the Center on Media and Child Health and has an Ask Me column that keeps getting updated. So it's just sort of looking at a pediatrician's perspective about media, something to know about. Cordelia Anderson, who I mentioned at the beginning, she has recently stepped down from doing trainings, but her website is still active and is still there, and her books are still available, and she's still amazing. So just knowing that that's another resource to look for as you attempt to learn more about this topic. Okay, so this is my contact information. I'm Allison. I can be reached at 1-800-325-HOPE here at our office in Minneapolis. I'm thankful to do the work that I do with the phenomenal team that we have at the Zero Abuse Project. Jacob Wetterling Resource Center is one of the programs of Zero Abuse Project, and we want to prevent child abuse, and we want to help families and help communities raise healthy kids. So thank you for taking this hour out of your day to get more information on this complicated subject. If we can ever be more of a service to you, please let us know. We have advocates here 24/7. We have advocates answering our crisis calls and here during the workday as well to be helpful. So please reach out as you need us, and thank you for your time today.